Hello everybody, and what is going on? It is Moondropper here, and I'm back with a different kind of video today. So today, I was watching a fellow YouTuber play a Let's Play of the game Fallout 4, which I'm sure many of you guys are pretty familiar with. And in that, he stumbled upon something that looked very similar to a Nirnroot, which is, for those of you who don't know, is a staple plant of the Elder Scrolls series, which is also a Bethesda game. And this basically sparked something in my head where I was like, what if Fallout and the Elder Scrolls could potentially take place in the same universe? So I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that there have been a whole bunch of different theories as to how Fallout and the Elder Scrolls could potentially take place in the same universe, and if Bethesda was trying to take a Ubisoft kind of approach to their games, where all the games tend to be similar in the same universe, and maybe that this could be the same deal with Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. So I did some research, and as I said, many people have been coming up with their own theories as to how Fallout and the Elder Scrolls could take place in the same universe. So I decided that I would do my own type of game theory type video on how that could potentially be true. Because, well, I haven't really done a game theory video in quite a long while. I believe my last one was, well, that was almost a year and a half ago. That was a long time ago. And this one isn't going to really be too much of edited like that one. This one's just going to be me more kind of unscripted. I do have an outline so I can kind of try to stay on topic as to what I want to talk about. But other than that, it's just like unscripted, and instead of all the pictures and editing in the background, I'm just going to put some gameplay in the background. I don't really know what game yet, probably an Elder Scrolls game, because that would kind of make sense considering what the theory is. But yeah, so I hope you guys all enjoy this little theory video, and well, let us start. So in order to pick apart the theory as to how Elder Scrolls and the Fallout series could take place in the same universe, you first have to take a look at a timeline from a timeline perspective as to where the games would fall in line with each other. So naturally, you would probably think that Fallout takes place after the Elder Scrolls, considering Elder Scrolls is a very loose interpretation on medieval society on our own planet, and Fallout takes place in the distant future. But I would personally believe that actually Fallout takes place thousands of years before the Elder Scrolls games, and there's many reasons as to why that is, so I would probably guess I'll just get right into those. So, and first off, you have to look at the economy of Fallout and the society on how they kind of run stuff. So basically, in the Fallout games, people are just trying to survive. They hunt and they gather and they scavenge, but the thing is, they don't really replace what they scavenge. And a lot of the stuff that they're taking, such as certain metals and different resources, are not renewable. So in order for them to make a sustainable economy, then they would have to kind of try and replace, and in the world of Fallout, they're using up more than they're actually replacing, whether it's with guns or different resources like that. So for society to keep moving on forward, you're gonna have to actually regress before you can start to improve. And they probably would have had to regress back into the days of medieval times, because, you know, in the medieval times, you're not really using up as much resources as you would in modern day, and it just seems more reasonable that over time, they would regress back to a society where you're basically just living more off the land, but at the same time, you're still a relatively advanced society. And the thing is, with Fallout, you may be thinking, well, it's all devastated by nuclear war, and there's no vegetation, there's rarely any animals that aren't mutated by some sort of radiation, so it doesn't really seem likely that the lush green worlds of Skyrim or Cyrodiil or Morrowind or any of that could potentially be happening in the same universe. But the thing with nuclear radiation is, it's only a temporary thing. For example, the Chernobyl disaster, which was one of the most devastating nuclear kind of implosions or devastations that we've had in our world, happened in 1986. But the thing is, in Chernobyl, there's already evidence of plant life and vegetation already starting to come back, and it's almost inhabitable again by people, which is absolutely crazy. So nuclear radiation doesn't stay around for a long time. And especially if we're considering Fallout taking place thousands of years before the Elder Scrolls, it's definitely probable that plant life would start to grow back, and over time more animal species would continue to adapt and kind of revert back to their original selves. And it also explains why in such providences of the Elder Scrolls world, such as Morrowind, where there are humongous plant lives like mushrooms or just stuff like that, where in our real world they probably wouldn't get that big unless they were mutated by some sort of radiation or something like that. Now, it would definitely have to be a certain regress in technology, because in Fallout you have guns and weapons like that, but in the Elder Scrolls games you have more just swords and bows and medieval type stuff like that. So in the world of Fallout, guns and ammunition are definitely continuing to be made, but as the people continue to die out, the memories they have and the tools and all the things that they have to build those guns and build those weapons are gonna die out with them. So the children of the people who survived the Fallout wars and all that would definitely have to find ways that they can live, and it would definitely be a more basic society to where we are present, or where Fallout takes place after or before all the wars and stuff. Alright, so the second point that I would have to bring up is the geography. Now, Fallout is set to take place in our real world, which, as most of you know, is separated up into 7 continents. There are many different islands and stuff like that. However, in the Elder Scrolls, it takes place in a world called Nirn, which is essentially one big condensed continent with a few different islands on the outside. So you may be wondering how, if Fallout took place before the Elder Scrolls, how would all the world basically just get condensed back into one continent? Well, it's a bit of a stretch, but thinking of the nuclear bombs going off during the wars, there would have to be, for the world to be absolutely devastated as it is in Fallout, it would have to be thousands and many, or maybe not thousands, but definitely hundreds of nuclear bombs going off. And with that amount of explosions and all that, it is not really improbable to think that the tectonic plates beneath our planet would begin to shift, and certain things such as earthquakes and tsunamis would occur, as has been demonstrated in our own past with the nuclear meltdowns in Japan and all that, causing a whole bunch of tsunamis and earthquakes. And it would definitely affect our Earth's continental drift. And if you've ever heard the Pangea theory, which most of you probably have in science classes and stuff, that theory is that at one point in time Earth was all one centralized continent, and then they all drifted apart eventually. But it's definitely something that you could probably think of, that all the world would shift back into one continent with a whole bunch of assistance from nuclear explosions and all stuff like that. Now, something that may be a bit harder to think of is, in the Fallout universe, all of the real races that are there are the humans, and then those essentially affected by the nuclear radiation. And well, of course, there's definitely animal life and plant life and stuff, but in terms of the humans, there's basically just regular humans and ghouls and stuff that are influenced by radiation. And it's something that you may have to think about a little bit, but some of the races in Elder Scrolls, it's not improbable to think that they could be the direct result of nuclear radiation. Say the Khajiits, for example, or the Argonians. Those are basically lizard people or cat people, and well, it's not really improbable to think that something our own world has demonstrated is that nuclear radiation can cause definite misformations of people, and it's not that unlikely to think that maybe one of those mutations could be scales or excess fur or a tail or something like that, because our own history has proven that people can grow extra legs, or certain animals have grown, extra eyes from living in nuclear waste or something like that. So it's not really improbable to think that over time, people could shift into different races. And one of the most prominent examples of that would be the elves in the Elder Scrolls, because, you know, the elves and the humans aren't really too much of a stretch in difference of how they are. You know, elves really just have pointier ears, they might be shorter, and they may have different physiques from humans. But, for example, the Dark Elves in the Elder Scrolls, maybe those were people who were living near one of the nuclear bombs that went off, and it wouldn't really be unlikely because they could potentially survive that, you know, by whatever means that they did, but it wouldn't be unlikely that being that close to a whole bunch of exposed heat would cause their skin to char a little bit, for lack of a better term, and make it go darker, as it would seem with the Dark Elves. And that would also explain why they're fire resistant, because, you know, surviving that big of a heat explosion happening really close in front of you as they continue to reproduce and pass on themselves from generation to generation, you know, that would explain why they have the darker skin as in comparison to the other elves, and why they're fire resistant, basically. Now, one of the things that may be a bit harder for, I don't know, maybe a bit more, some people may not be able to really think of like this, is all of Tamriel especially, but Nirn basically has one centralized language, and that is something that is very easy to think of, considering that it's all basically just one centralized continent, which would mean, because basically in our real world, people have different languages. Like, I speak English, but somebody over in Asia might speak a different language than me, because whenever the first languages of their areas were being created, then they just figured out a way that they could combine their words together to make sense with everybody else who lives around them, not really generally affecting people who live across the other side of the world. And it would explain why people have different dialects and different accents and stuff, just because generally the geography of where they live. However, if Earth was made into basically one just giant continent, which would be Tamriel, or the world of Nirn, basically, it would definitely be very prevalent that people would find one common language, because with one continent it would be much easier to trade from the northern tip to the southern tip, as it would be from me to trade with somebody all across the world in a different country over there, because it's just one landmass, and that wouldn't have to go overseas or anything like that. So it would be very expectable for them to only come up with one language, and it would explain also why people, say from the south of the southern parts of Tamriel, have a different dialect from the Nords of Skyrim or something, because basically the accents come from different regions, and that just explains why they would all really have different dialects, but really one centralized language. Now, one of the more intricate things, I would say, is the religions of Tamriel. Now, if Fallout takes place in a world that is supposed to be our own, we already know that there are thousands of established religions out there, but some of them have definitely been around for a very long time. But if we're saying that Fallout takes place thousands of years before Elder Scrolls, then it wouldn't be too hard to think that more religions would be created over time. You see, in the world of Fallout, it's basically the goal of the humans is to just survive. And that's really it, because there's really there's really not that much hope for those specific people living in the nuclear wasteland to advance in society. Society will only be advanced over time, such as the cavemen or the most primitive people in our own world, whereas our society is more focused on things such as religion or business or stuff like that. They were more focused on hunting and gathering and just setting up their own centralized lives. And it wasn't until that they found the found the safety of homes and began to advance as society when religion became a very more prevalent thing. And that would be the cavemen and primitive people would be very similar to the survivors of the Fallout Wars, because basically all they're trying to do is survive, and that's just a similar theme between them. And if you look at our world, the most widely practiced religion, with like billions of followers, would probably be Christianity. But if you look at in the whole timeline of our planet as a whole, Christianity has only been around for a couple thousands of years in comparison to however long the Earth's been around. So if Fallout takes place in the time before, thousands of years before Elder Scrolls, it wouldn't be really that hard to think that more and more religions would be created over time, such as worshipping all the gods in the Elder Scrolls. And the thing about the religions in the Elder Scrolls, though, is a lot of them have been, well, they've been kind of demonstrated to be true for an extent, because at the end of Skyrim, if you remember, you actually go to Sovngarde, which is basically the Nords version of heaven, or the afterlife, and there's certain Daedric people that you meet that really demonstrate that what they are worshipping is something that actually is there and makes a difference inside of their own world. So it's very easy to think that over time more religions could be created and certain things like that. Now, one of the harder things to probably get around is, and probably the hardest thing to get around, is if the Elder Scrolls takes place in a world that after the Fallout universe, then how is there magicka? Because if there was magicka, then don't you think the people of Fallout would probably be using it? However, this is a bit of a stretch, but if you've ever heard of the story called The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks, it takes place in a medieval fantasy world with magic and different races and dwarves and, elves, all that kind of stuff. Basically your typical medieval fantasy world, a world very similar to the world of the Elder Scrolls. However, it takes place in a world that is devastated by nuclear war, and it takes place thousands of years after that, where there's magic, and the war basically uncovers a certain extent of magicka, or magical abilities, I guess it's really not called magicka in the stories, that the people learn to use in their daily lives. So it's a bit of a stretch, but there's definitely a chance that the nuclear war could have been uncovering of the magic in the world of the Elder Scrolls. And not to mention, as I mentioned previously, there are many different religious figures and supernatural deities that are in the world of the Elder Scrolls, so it's not that hard to think that potentially they could bestow their magical abilities onto other people. So yeah, that's basically my take on the theory that the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout games could take place in the same universe. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but that's just basically my own input. Leave it down in the comments whether you agree or disagree with my points, or have your own specific points that you would like to share. And thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope that you did enjoy this. If you did, please remember to like and just subscribe so I know if you guys like this type of video and I should make more in the future. But anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful and safe day, and I will see you all next time. Farewell.